Lieutenant Emily Shadow Carter moved silently through the narrow corridors of the U.S. Navy aircraft carrier USS Independence, her steps nearly imperceptible on the polished steel floor. The early morning lights glinted off her neatly pressed uniform as she carried a tray of steaming coffee cups, careful not to spill a drop. The hum of machinery echoed through the halls, mingling with distant chatter from the crew stations above. To anyone who glanced at her, Emily was just another officer, nothing more than the young woman tasked with serving coffee during the morning briefing. Invisible, unremarkable, and utterly underestimated. As she approached the briefing room, Emily's eyes flicked to the digital displays mounted along the walls. Satellite imagery of the surrounding waters scrolled silently, intelligence reports flashed in coded text, and a cluster of officers gathered near a large projection screen. They were already in a heated discussion about an upcoming mission, a covert operation scheduled to take place in hostile territory. Emily paused, her gaze sweeping the room, noting subtle details most would miss. The slight twitch of a captain's eye as he doubted a subordinate, the tension in a junior officer's shoulders, and the faint smudge of fingerprints on the intel tablet someone had carelessly touched. Carrying the coffee tray, she weaved between the officers, silently observing, cataloging, remembering. Every flicker of information, every murmured concern was stored in her mind. Emily's reputation, known only to a select few, had preceded her in whispers and classified reports, though none of the officers present knew it yet. She had been a top operative in the Navy's most secret missions, assignments so sensitive they didn't appear on any record, missions erased as if they never existed. Yet here she was, ostensibly a mere coffee server, her lethal skills hidden beneath a calm, polite smile. Emily set a cup in front of Lieutenant Commander Harris, who barely looked up, busy reviewing a digital map that showed a series of islands and shipping lanes. She caught a glimpse of the main intelligence screen and froze for a split second. A coded signal blinked, a brief flash of warning. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Emily had learned to spot such anomalies instinctively. She memorized it, tucked it away for later analysis. No one else in the room noticed. They were too engrossed in their own concerns, debating probabilities and contingencies, unaware that the most crucial observer had been among them the whole time. The officers' voices rose in volume as they argued over strategy. Admiral Thomas Hawke Reynolds was not yet in the room, but his shadow loomed over the discussion. Emily knew how his presence would command respect, silence dissent, and force accountability. But she also knew that, in the absence of the Admiral, small mistakes could go unnoticed, errors that could be fatal during the upcoming operation. Her eyes darted to the map, noticing minor inconsistencies in reported enemy positions. Someone had misread the satellite feed, or perhaps the intelligence had been deliberately manipulated. Either way, it was a flaw she filed away in her mind, ready to exploit if necessary. As she moved down the row of officers, Emily's attention was drawn to Ensign Lopez, a young officer nervously tapping at his tablet. His hands shook slightly, betraying inexperience. Emily placed a cup of coffee gently in front of him, offering a small, encouraging smile. "Steady hands, Ensign," she said softly, her tone light, almost playful. Lopez glanced up, startled by her attention. Most people assumed she was just a friendly officer, polite but inconsequential. No one had any idea she had been trained to diffuse tense situations, to read body language, and to anticipate threats before they happened. Her mind flickered briefly to the upcoming mission. Intelligence had indicated that a rogue faction had been tracking U.S. Navy movements in the region. The operation would require precision, stealth, and nerves of steel. The room hummed with overconfidence, officers debating tactics they only partially understood. Emily suppressed a smirk. Experience had taught her that overconfidence could be deadly. One wrong decision, one misread signal could cost lives. She would remain in the background, invisible, until her expertise was needed. And when the moment came, she would be unstoppable. Emily's eyes scanned the room one last time as the officers argued over contingency plans. She noticed a small cluster of digital codes flashing briefly on a side monitor, almost as if warning her silently. Her pulse quickened, but she maintained the calm, composed exterior of a routine officer on duty. Every motion was deliberate, every glance calculated. Even as she poured coffee, her mind processed multiple scenarios, running simulations silently, mentally preparing for every eventuality. The briefing room itself was a mix of tension and routine. Officers tapped on tablets, gestured at holographic maps, and whispered theories about enemy movements. To them, Emily was just a background fixture, the familiar figure who brought coffee without comment. But she saw everything: the missteps, the gaps in surveillance, the subtle indicators of danger. And she knew that soon the entire room would need to rely on someone they hadn't expected. As she finished placing the last cup, a flicker of movement at the doorway caught her eye. The Admiral was approaching. Emily's stance shifted subtly, the small, unseen tension in her shoulders signaling readiness. Today, the shadows would speak, and for the first time in months, the room would see her not as the coffee girl, but as Shadow, an operative whose skills could tip the balance of life and death in ways no one imagined. The storm was about to begin, and Emily was ready. The briefing room hummed with low murmurs and the occasional clatter of tablet screens as the officers debated the upcoming operation. Emily Shadow Carter remained at the periphery, her coffee tray almost forgotten in her hands as her eyes darted from screen to screen. Every flicker of data, every subtle shift in the officer's posture, told her more than words ever could. Lieutenant Commander Harris furrowed his brow, glancing at the satellite feeds, muttering about inconsistencies. Emily's trained eyes caught what he had missed, a subtle anomaly in enemy movement patterns. She filed it away silently, knowing that no one here was prepared to notice it. The room's tension was palpable. Captain Mitchell leaned over a tablet, pointing at a small cluster of islands near international waters. "If they've moved the radar units as projected, we're walking into a trap," he said, voice low but edged with alarm. Others nodded, unaware that the data they relied on had gaps. Emily's mind raced as she cataloged every variable: currents, weather patterns, patrol schedules. One misstep, she thought, could cost lives. She refilled a cup for Ensign Lopez, who glanced at her with nervous gratitude. "Thanks," he whispered, his hands trembling slightly. Emily offered a small nod, silently acknowledging his fear while knowing she had been in far worse situations. Whispers spread through the room, speculative and uneasy. "Do you think Shadow here?" someone muttered under their breath. Emily's ears pricked, though no one dared look at her. Her reputation was known only to the highest echelons. Most officers had only heard the name in classified briefings, never expecting her to appear on a carrier deck. The murmurs didn't reach her ears. Her mind was focused entirely on the incoming intelligence. A second anomaly flickered on a secondary display, and she traced its origin. This was no random glitch. Someone, or something, was attempting to intercept or manipulate the operation. Emily moved among the officers again, carrying the coffee tray with deliberate calm. Her movements were smooth, almost invisible, yet each step allowed her to observe a different angle of the room. She noted Ensign Lopez shifting nervously and quietly adjusted the position of a chair near him, a small gesture but one that brought him a fraction more confidence. Small interventions were her style, silent, unnoticed, but effective. Every glance at the maps, every fleeting observation, added to a mental map she was constructing. By the time the Admiral arrived, she would already understand far more than any officer present. The conversation in the room grew heated. Some officers argued about the best approach for the upcoming mission. They debated patrol routes, extraction points, and possible enemy responses. Emily's eyes narrowed as she noticed their assumptions were flawed. They relied on historical data and predictable patterns, failing to consider the unconventional tactics the adversary had been experimenting with. She calculated the risks internally: the probability of ambush, the chance of detection, the likelihood of friendly casualties. She remained silent, outwardly just a background figure, but every second her mind moved faster than anyone else in the room. A lieutenant accidentally bumped into a coffee tray, sending a cup sliding toward the floor. Emily caught it with a swift, fluid motion, saving the beverage and the officer's dignity. No one noticed the precision in her hands or the lightning-fast calculation of trajectory that prevented disaster. To the untrained eye, it was merely a polite gesture. To Emily, it was training. Years of missions had honed her reflexes, teaching her that every detail, no matter how small, could determine success or failure. Her presence in the room, though unnoticed, was already shaping events in subtle, invisible ways. As officers continued to argue, Emily's mind returned to the anomalies. She recognized the signals as attempts to mask enemy fleet positions. Someone was feeding misleading intelligence, but whether it was intentional sabotage or enemy manipulation was unclear. Either scenario demanded immediate action, though no one present was aware. Emily mentally mapped multiple courses of action, contingency plans, and exit strategies. She imagined the mission's progress in real time, anticipating the moves of both her own forces and the enemy. In her mind, the battle had already begun, though to everyone else, it was merely a routine briefing. Suddenly, a voice cut through the room. Lieutenant Commander Harris, frustrated, slammed a hand on the table. "We're missing something. These readings don't match reality. We're walking blind if we proceed like this." Emily's ears pricked. Finally, someone had voiced what she had known from the moment she entered. She leaned slightly closer to the map, eyes scanning the satellite data, noting the discrepancies. Every officer here was assuming the enemy would follow patterns they'd never used before. Emily's pulse quickened, not with fear but with anticipation. The moment for her expertise was approaching. The tension in the room was almost tangible, like the quiet before a storm. Officers whispered back and forth, speculating, doubting, questioning each other. Emily's hands rested lightly on the coffee tray, her calm exterior a stark contrast to the undercurrent of panic. She was ready. The anomalies, the gaps, the overlooked signals, all of them were pieces of a puzzle she could solve. And soon she would. No one here knew it yet, but when the Admiral arrived, the room would no longer see the coffee girl as invisible. They would see shadow. And in that moment, Emily allowed herself a brief smile. The storm had begun. The briefing room door slid open with a smooth, commanding motion. Every officer instinctively straightened, attention snapping to the entrance. Admiral Thomas Hawk Reynolds, a man whose reputation alone demanded respect, strode in with deliberate authority. His uniform bore medals and ribbons that told stories of decades spent navigating both the high seas and the shadows of covert operations. The room seemed to shrink in his presence, a low hum of nervous energy filling the air as conversations hushed and fingers hovered over control panels. Emily's shadow Carter adjusted the tray in her hands, her stance subtle but poised. To the untrained eye, she was merely delivering coffee. Yet beneath her calm exterior, her senses were razor-sharp. The Admiral's arrival, the slight changes in officers' posture, the almost imperceptible tension in the air, all of it registered in her mind. She observed the smallest details, the slight twitch of Captain Mitchell's left eye, Lieutenant Commander Harris's clenched jaw, the subtle shift in Ensign Lopez's breathing. Every micro-expression was a clue to the room's undercurrent of fear, doubt, and anticipation. The Admiral's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Good morning, officers. Let's begin." His gaze swept across the table, scanning faces and digital feeds. Emily's eyes followed his every movement, noting the subtle cues and gestures that revealed his priorities and concerns. She had trained under officers like him before, deciphering their intentions, predicting their expectations. Her pulse quickened, not from fear but from anticipation. Today, her skills would be tested, in a way the crew had no idea was coming. Admiral Reynolds launched into the briefing, his voice steady and commanding. "Intelligence indicates a rogue faction has moved assets into international waters. They've been tracking us, attempting to intercept communications and potentially preparing an ambush." His words resonated throughout the room, but few officers grasped the gravity of what he was saying. Emily, however, had already connected the dots. The anomalies she had spotted earlier were not random. They were signs of deliberate interference. She filed the information internally, preparing to act when necessary. The Admiral paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. Officers murmured among themselves, debating the likelihood of detection and the feasibility of their mission plans. Emily moved carefully among them, placing coffee cups with fluid precision, each gesture deliberate and unobtrusive. She caught subtle gestures, the tension in their fingers, the rapid blinking of anxious eyes, the slight leaning forward in anticipation. Her mind ran simulations at lightning speed, calculating contingencies, predicting outcomes, and preparing strategies far beyond the scope of any officer in the room. Captain Mitchell spoke up, his voice slightly trembling. "Sir, the patrol schedules indicate a potential breach in our surveillance. If they've anticipated our moves, we could be walking into a trap." Emily's head tilted slightly. The captain's observation was correct but incomplete. She noted the small details he had overlooked, the faint misalignment in the satellite feed, the inconsistencies in enemy vessel reporting, and the subtle delay in intercepted communications. To her, the patterns were glaring. To them, invisible. Admiral Reynolds nodded, his gaze shifting to Emily briefly before returning to the room. "We will rely on precision, discipline, and our best officers for this operation. Any misstep will be costly." Emily's pulse remained steady, her expression calm. The tension in the room could have been a knife pressed to their collective throats, but she moved like a phantom, unnoticed yet fully aware. Every glance she stole at the intelligence screens, every observation of the officers' reactions, was catalogued and stored. She noticed Ensign Lopez shifting nervously, glancing at his tablet and then around the room. Emily moved closer, placing a hand subtly on the edge of his console. "Stay focused," she whispered, her voice quiet but firm. Lopez blinked, startled, but steadied himself. To anyone else, it was a minor act of support. To Emily, it was part of maintaining operational readiness. Every officer's confidence mattered, no matter how small the action seemed. The Admiral's voice rose again, outlining the mission parameters with precise detail. Satellite images, tactical maps, and operational objectives filled the display screens. Emily's eyes tracked every movement, noting discrepancies in the enemy's reported positions. Someone had manipulated the data, attempting to mask true threats. She cataloged every anomaly, mentally preparing how she would exploit it once the mission commenced. The officers, caught in the flow of routine briefing procedure, remained unaware. Emily's mind raced ahead, formulating contingencies that would keep her team alive. A sudden flicker on one of the peripheral monitors drew her attention, a coded message, brief and almost imperceptible, signaling an urgent anomaly. Her hand twitched slightly, but she maintained the illusion of calm. The message indicated movement in an unexpected location, a potential ambush point that could compromise the mission. Emily stored the coordinates, silently adjusting her mental map of the battlefield. The officers continued to debate, unaware that the critical piece of the puzzle had just flashed across her mind. As the briefing progressed, Emily's presence remained largely unnoticed, yet her awareness was total. Every gesture, every whispered exchange, every subtle hesitation in the room was catalogued. She knew the mission's success depended on information, speed, and precision, all qualities she possessed in abundance. The Admiral's words were important, but her mind was already running ahead, tracing the steps of the enemy, anticipating their moves, and preparing to step out of the shadows when the time was right. Finally, Admiral Reynolds paused, letting a pregnant silence settle over the room. Emily straightened slightly, her senses on high alert. She could feel the tension ripple, the undercurrent of unease that only a trained operative could detect. She knew that soon the room would shift, from uncertainty to recognition, from chaos to respect. The storm was gathering, and she was poised to take the lead. The invisible officer was ready to reveal the true force lurking in plain sight. The room had been tense since the Admiral's arrival, officers debating contingencies and analyzing intelligence feeds, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Emily, Shadow, Carter moved gracefully among them, her tray of coffee now almost forgotten. Her eyes flicked from screens to faces, cataloging every micro-expression, every whispered doubt. The anomalies she had noticed earlier were converging into a pattern, one that could mean imminent danger if ignored. Her mind was already running through solutions, contingencies, and countermeasures. The room buzzed with uncertainty, but Emily's calm presence was a silent anchor, unnoticed yet vital. Admiral Thomas Hawk Reynolds scanned the room, his gaze sharp and commanding. He paused mid-briefing, eyes narrowing as if calculating probabilities in real time. Officers stiffened, sensing the weight of his attention. Conversations faltered, voices dropped to whispers. Then his eyes fixed on Emily. For the first time, the room's invisible coffee server was the center of his attention. He leaned slightly forward, his voice deliberate, slicing through the murmurs. "Shadow, report." The room froze instantly. Silence descended like a heavy curtain. Officers blinked, exchanged shocked glances, and froze mid-motion. The call sign Shadow was legendary, spoken in classified corridors, whispered in encrypted briefings, a name associated with covert operations erased from public records. No one present had expected her to be here, let alone in plain sight. A nervous cough echoed from the back of the room. The room's usual buzz of debate and speculation evaporated into tension, so thick it was nearly suffocating. Emily straightened, shoulders squared, eyes calm yet alert. Her mind cataloged every reaction: surprise, disbelief, confusion, and the faint flicker of fear. The officers who had ignored her mere moments ago were now trying to reconcile the unassuming lieutenant serving coffee with the operative known only by legend. Memories of missions erased from history flickered behind her composed exterior. Intelligence extractions in hostile zones, high-value rescues behind enemy lines, operations executed with surgical precision. The weight of her history pressed silently against the room's collective perception. Lieutenant Commander Harris, whose brow had been furrowed in concentration only seconds ago, leaned back in disbelief. That's impossible," he whispered under his breath. Captain Mitchell's mouth opened, then closed again, words failing him. Even the junior officers struggled to hide their astonishment, realizing that the quiet, observant figure they had casually ignored held decades of experience, skill, and deadly expertise. Emily's calm gaze swept the room once more, as if evaluating who could be trusted with this revelation and who might panic under the sudden shift in reality. Admiral Reynolds' voice cut through the tension again, firmer this time, reclaiming command of the room. "Shadow, you've been briefed on the anomalies. Proceed with analysis. I want actionable recommendations now." Emily's eyes flicked to the main intelligence screen, absorbing data at lightning speed. Her pulse was steady, but her mind was alive with rapid calculations. Enemy movements, satellite anomalies, potential traps. She pieced it all together in a fraction of a second. Every officer in the room was waiting, uncertain how to react to the presence of a legend now standing among them. Emily took a step forward, her voice calm and precise. "Sir, the anomalies indicate multiple layers of interference in enemy tracking systems. One pattern suggests deliberate manipulation, likely an attempt to divert attention from a secondary strike force approaching from the north." She moved fluidly to the digital map, pointing out coordinates and projected paths. The room leaned in, spellbound. Her words were concise, her analysis surgical. Officers whispered under their breath, exchanging stunned glances. The coffee girl had vanished, replaced by the operative whose reputation had preceded her into shadows and secrets. She continued, detailing contingencies with confidence. Every word she spoke confirmed the fears the officers had failed to articulate. The intelligence they were relying on was incomplete and potentially compromised. Her eyes flicked to the blinking symbols on the peripheral monitors, tracing the hidden signals, anticipating enemy movements with uncanny precision. The officers realized, one by one, that she had already accounted for scenarios they hadn't even considered. For them, it was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Shadow was no legend. They had underestimated her entirely. A hushed conversation started among the junior officers, barely audible over Emily's continued briefing. She's the one whispered. The one they never talk about, another replied, eyes wide. Emily didn't react outwardly, but she caught every word. Trust, doubt, and awe swirled through the room, and she silently catalogued who could be relied upon when the mission moved from theory to execution. The Admiral observed quietly, his steely gaze acknowledging that the room now recognized her authority, even if the officers weren't yet ready to admit it openly. Finally, Emily concluded her assessment. Sir, with current assets and timing, we can neutralize the threat without direct confrontation, but any misstep could expose us to countermeasures. Immediate recalibration of patrol routes is recommended, and a small reconnaissance team should verify coordinates before full deployment. The room remained silent for a beat longer than necessary, absorbing her words. Then the murmurs began, first tentative, then growing, as officers exchanged astonished nods and whispered approval. Shadow had spoken, and her voice carried authority no one could ignore. For the first time in weeks, the briefing room's atmosphere shifted. Tension remained, but now it was tempered with clarity. The officers had witnessed a living legend operate in plain sight, a calm presence capable of dissecting chaos with precision. Emily returned to her tray, moving subtly among the officers once more, but the eyes that had once ignored her now tracked her every motion. She was no longer invisible. Shadow had emerged from the shadows, commanding attention and respect, and the room would never look at her the same way again. The Admiral nodded, his voice steady and approving. Good work, Shadow. We proceed as you've outlined. Full readiness in 30 minutes. Officers scrambled to adjust plans, now aware of the unparalleled skill standing among them. Emily's mind, however, was already ahead, calculating the next steps, the unseen threats, the contingencies. She had reclaimed her place, not as the coffee girl, but as the Navy's deadliest covert operative. And the storm had only just begun. The room buzzed with a new energy, though it was tense, electric, almost palpable. Officers whispered among themselves, glancing at Emily's Shadow Carter with a mix of awe, disbelief, and uncertainty. For days she had been invisible, a silent observer carrying coffee and cataloging every detail. Now, the legendary operative's presence had shattered assumptions. The very air in the briefing room seemed charged. Everyone instinctively recognized that Shadow was no ordinary officer. Yet trust, like the fragile balance of intelligence she had just revealed, was not automatic. It had to be earned. Admiral Thomas Hawk Reynolds observed quietly from the front, his steely eyes assessing the reactions of his team. Shadow had performed flawlessly. She had identified the anomalies, predicted enemy movements, and outlined a strategy that minimized risk. Yet the officers were unsure how to respond to someone who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere, commanding authority that exceeded even the Admiral's expectations. Emily sensed the hesitation, cataloging it silently. Some doubted her loyalty, others were intimidated by her skill, and a few were genuinely impressed but wary. She needed to bridge the gap between myth and reality, authority and credibility. Sir, Emily began, her voice calm but firm, carrying authority without arrogance. I understand some of you may have reservations about my involvement. That's natural. My past missions are classified and many of you have never seen my operational experience firsthand. But today, we are facing a threat that demands precision, anticipation, and adaptability. Hesitation will cost lives. I am here to ensure that doesn't happen. Her words were measured, deliberate, but filled with a quiet intensity that drew officers' eyes. A few junior lieutenants exchanged hesitant nods, realizing they were in the presence of someone whose expertise could save them. Shadow wasn't asking for trust. She was commanding it through competence, through calm clarity in the face of imminent danger. Lieutenant Commander Harris shifted in his seat, still skeptical but intrigued. And what about the anomalies you identified? He asked cautiously. How can we be certain your analysis is correct? Emily's gaze met his, unwavering. She pointed to the digital map and the cluster of blinking signals on the monitor. These patterns are not random. They indicate deliberate interference in both our communications and enemy tracking feeds. If we proceed without recalibrating patrols and verifying coordinates, we risk detection and compromise. I've accounted for multiple contingencies, but this mission requires full execution of the revised plan. Murmurs filled the room as officers digested her explanation. The logic was sound, the analysis precise. Shadow's authority was undeniable. Some began to realize that the young lieutenant who had poured coffee just moments ago was the only one in the room capable of seeing the operation from every angle. Others, though wary, understood that questioning her competence now would be a mistake. Emily moved closer to the table, adjusting maps, pointing out strategic locations and blind spots. "We must assign a small reconnaissance team to verify enemy positions," she continued. "I will coordinate their approach. Any deviation from the plan risks exposure. Trust is essential here, not blind trust, but confidence in the actions we have meticulously prepared." Her tone was steady, but each word resonated with the subtle intensity of someone accustomed to life-and-death consequences. Ensign Lopez, who had been jittery moments before, straightened in his seat. Emily's calm authority had a ripple effect. Even the most uncertain officers began to focus, their attention sharpening. She noticed subtle cues, the officers adjusting their posture, leaning into the map, nodding quietly. Shadow's presence had shifted the room. No longer just passive participants, the team was beginning to function as a cohesive unit under her guidance. The Admiral nodded approvingly, his expression unchanging but eyes gleaming. "Shadow, your assessment aligns with intelligence reports we have not yet shared publicly. Proceed with your recommendations." Emily's lips curved ever so slightly, acknowledging his support. She turned to the officers once more. "We move in 3 phases: reconnaissance, adjustment, and execution. I will lead reconnaissance. Each team member will follow protocol exactly. Any deviation compromises the mission. Questions now or after deployment will be addressed with clarity and speed. Hesitation is the enemy here." Her words left no room for doubt. Officers who had doubted her now faced a choice: respect her authority and follow instructions, or risk disaster. Shadow's reputation, reinforced by her calm demeanor and surgical analysis, had dissolved any lingering skepticism. Even the most hesitant officers understood that she had the knowledge, experience, and tactical foresight to command this operation. The briefing concluded with precise assignments. Teams were outlined, contingencies were clarified, and Shadow personally briefed each member on their role. Emily's movements were fluid and confident, each instruction delivered with authority, yet tempered with empathy. She recognized fear in her team, a natural reaction, and subtly reassured them without diminishing the gravity of the mission. By the time the Admiral signaled the end of the briefing, the team had transformed from a room of uncertain officers into a coordinated unit, prepared to follow Shadow's lead. As the officers filed out, murmuring among themselves about the astonishing revelation, Emily lingered. Her eyes scanned the intelligence screens again, noting subtle flickers of incoming data. The anomalies she had detected earlier had not gone away, they were evolving. Her pulse remained steady, but her mind raced through contingencies, anticipating potential threats before they could materialize. The trust she had begun to establish was fragile, but essential. She had earned their respect for the moment, but the true test would come in the field. Finally, Emily collected her coffee tray, moving through the room like a ghost. Officers' eyes followed her now, a mixture of awe and newfound respect in every glance. Shadow had stepped out of the shadows and into a position of authority, and the room would never forget it. The mission awaited, dangerous and unpredictable, but she was ready. Every calculation, every contingency, every risk had been accounted for. Trust had been tested, and for now it had passed. Outside the briefing room, Emily paused for a moment, hands folded over the tray, eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon through the narrow windows of the carrier. The storm was approaching. The enemy was unpredictable, and Shadow had just begun her work. The hangar bay was alive with activity, the metallic clang of equipment echoing against the walls. Crew members hustled to prepare the aircraft and support vehicles, the air thick with the scent of fuel and anticipation. Emily Shadow Carter moved through the chaos like a calm eye in the storm. Her uniform crisp, boots silent against the steel floor. She carried no unnecessary gear, only what was essential. Every step was calculated, every glance measured. To the untrained eye, she was simply another officer joining the mission. To anyone with experience, she radiated control, lethal efficiency, and focus. The strike team gathered around the briefing table, faces tense, eyes flicking nervously between one another. Shadow's reputation had preceded her, though most of the younger operators had yet to fully grasp her capabilities. She scanned the team quickly. Sergeant Kane, a veteran marksman, Corporal Diaz, explosive specialist, Lieutenant Park, communications expert, and a handful of additional tactical officers. Each carried a combination of nerves, excitement, and uncertainty. Emily noted micro-expressions, the tapping fingers, subtle shifts in posture, and eyes darting toward the exit routes. Every reaction told her something about how they would perform under pressure. "Listen up," Emily began, her voice calm, authoritative, yet carrying a quiet intensity that demanded attention. "We have a small window to insert, neutralize the threat, gather intel, and extract without being detected. The enemy has multiple redundancies and tracking systems. They anticipate standard patrols but not unconventional approaches. Deviate from the plan and we risk exposure. Move fast, move smart, and trust each other. Hesitation will get us killed." The team absorbed her words, nodding silently. Shadow's presence commanded respect. There was no room for argument. Every motion, every instruction was deliberate. She had learned that fear could paralyze, but confidence grounded the team. She would be their anchor, and they would rely on her without fully realizing how much. As they prepared for insertion, Emily's eyes scanned the satellite feeds and intelligence overlays one last time. Enemy positions shifted subtly, patterns emerging that confirmed her earlier suspicions. A rogue patrol had deviated slightly from its expected path, an anomaly that could compromise a frontal assault. Emily recalculated silently, adjusting insertion points and timing. The team wouldn't see the adjustment in real time, but they would follow her lead seamlessly. This was Shadow's signature style: anticipate, adapt, and execute flawlessly. The transport vehicle roared to life, and the team was loaded with precision. Emily took her place at the front, scanning the terrain through the reinforced viewport. Every shadow, every rise in the landscape, every movement registered in her mind. The mission had officially begun, and the calm she exuded was contagious. Sergeant Kane, who had been tense and skeptical, relaxed slightly under her gaze. Corporal Diaz checked his gear for the 5th time, and Emily's quiet presence steadied him without a word. The insertion point approached. Shadows of the terrain stretched long beneath the aircraft, and the team prepared for rapid deployment. Emily's mind raced through contingencies, enemy patrol patterns, possible escape routes, potential ambush sites. Her hands moved deftly over her equipment, ensuring everything was ready, every tool accounted for. One wrong step could compromise the mission, but she had already accounted for dozens of potential failures, and the team would follow her flawlessly if she led correctly. As the team deployed, Emily moved like a phantom. Silent, precise, and confident, she led the group through rough terrain, avoiding detection while keeping eyes on potential threats. Every step, every gesture, every glance was measured, calculated, and silent. Enemy surveillance drones hovered in the distance, their movements predictable but dangerous. Emily had already mapped their blind spots, guiding the team through the shadows where cameras and sensors couldn't detect them. Her reputation as Shadow was earned here in real time, not in whispers of the past. Tension rippled through the team as they approached the primary objective, a fortified outpost housing critical intelligence on the rogue faction. Emily assessed the approach, noting guard rotations, infrared sensors, and patrol routes. One miscalculation would trigger alarms, one misstep would end the mission. She motioned silently for the team to halt, crouching behind a natural ridge for cover. The team obeyed without question, eyes fixed on her. Shadow had never failed them, and they trusted her instinctively, even if they didn't yet know why. She issued precise instructions in short, whispered commands. Sergeant Kane would disable external cameras, Corporal Diaz would neutralize perimeter explosives, Lieutenant Park would jam communications temporarily. Emily's own movements were lethal, precise, and silent. She had trained for this moment for years, executing operations that had never been recorded, never publicly acknowledged. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, timing, enemy reactions, escape routes, and contingencies. Every microsecond mattered. The insertion proceeded flawlessly, yet danger lingered like a shadow. An enemy patrol unexpectedly changed course, almost spotting the team. Emily froze, recalculating, signaling the team to duck behind natural cover. The patrol passed without incident, but the moment underscored the stakes. Every action had to be perfect. She moved the team forward again, silent as a ghost, every gesture smooth, precise, and decisive. Shadow was no longer just a name. She was the team's guiding force, their anchor in chaos. As the outpost came into view, Emily's heart rate remained steady, but her mind raced through every possible contingency. The mission had reached the critical phase, infiltration. She signaled the team, and each member responded in perfect synchronization. Every step, every move, every breath was calculated to avoid detection. The tension was almost tangible, but under her leadership, fear became focus. Shadow had led them into the fire, and she would lead them out alive. The fortified outpost loomed ahead, dark and foreboding under the pale moonlight. Shadows stretched across the terrain, and the faint hum of distant generators mixed with the distant sounds of waves against the carrier's hull. Emily Shadow Carter crouched at the edge of a natural ridge, eyes scanning for patrols, sensors, and signs of enemy movement. Every heartbeat seemed amplified in the tense silence. The strike team, positioned behind her, followed without hesitation. Every muscle in her body was alert, every thought focused. This was the crucible, the point where training, skill, and instinct would determine survival. Sergeant Kane tapped Emily's shoulder, signaling that the perimeter cameras were neutralized. Corporal Diaz adjusted the small explosives he would use to disable the gate silently. Lieutenant Park confirmed temporary communication jamming was in place. The team moved as one, perfectly synchronized under Emily's quiet, precise leadership. Even the youngest operators, initially nervous and uncertain, mirrored her calm intensity. Shadow had transformed fear into action, doubt into trust, hesitation into precision. Emily led the team forward, every step deliberate, every movement calculated. As they approached the outpost's main entrance, subtle vibrations in the ground alerted her to approaching enemy patrols. Her pulse remained steady, but her mind raced, calculating timings, trajectories, and possible contingencies. 2 o'clock, she whispered, pointing toward a shadow moving along the perimeter. The team flattened against the ridge, holding their breath as the patrol passed. One misstep, one wrong sound, and the mission would be compromised. Once the immediate threat passed, Emily signaled the team to advance. They navigated the terrain like phantoms, slipping past sensors and patrols. Every move was guided by Shadow's expert understanding of enemy behavior. She anticipated guard rotations, predicted reactions to subtle disturbances, and adjusted the team's path in real time. Each operator responded without question, trusting the unseen hand guiding them through the darkness. Her presence transformed a tense, high-risk operation into a fluid, almost choreographed maneuver. Reaching the main entrance, Emily crouched behind a reinforced wall, assessing the structure. Cameras, guards, and traps loomed, ready to expose the team to detection. She signaled Diaz, who carefully placed explosives to silently disable the gate. The team held their breath as a soft hiss echoed. The gate was neutralized. Shadow motioned them forward. Move, keep formation, eyes sharp. The team responded instantly, flowing through the entrance with military precision. Every second counted. Every misstep could ignite chaos. Inside, the outpost was a maze of corridors and rooms, dimly lit by emergency lighting. The team split according to Emily's plan, Kane and Diaz securing the path ahead, Park handling communications, while Emily led the reconnaissance and intelligence retrieval. The mission objective, the critical intel, was stored in a secure terminal deep within the facility. As they moved silently, Emily's senses remained hyperaware. Every creak, every faint movement, every whisper of sound was catalogued instantly. She was a shadow in the literal sense, guiding her team through danger unseen and unheard. Suddenly, a low alarm blared. A patrol had unexpectedly returned, spotting a minor discrepancy. Emily froze, quickly calculating options. The enemy's position had shifted and they were now in a race against detection. She gestured sharply, redirecting the team into a shadowed corridor flattening against walls. Gunfire erupted ahead, sharp, controlled bursts. Kane neutralized the guards silently, but the tension escalated. Emily's mind worked at lightning speed, calculating escape routes, cover points, and extraction sequences. One wrong decision here would mean disaster. Reaching the terminal, Emily bypassed the security system with practiced hands. The data flashed across the screen: operational codes, enemy movement plans, and strategic targets. She extracted the intel swiftly, ensuring no trace of their intrusion remained. But the operation was far from over. Enemy reinforcements were closing in faster than expected. Emily's eyes darted to the perimeter monitors. The team would need to move quickly to avoid being trapped. She issued orders in short, precise commands. Extraction, north exit. Move now, keep formation. Chaos erupted as the team moved toward the extraction point. Enemy forces had discovered a breach and were closing in. Explosions echoed in the distance, alarms blared, and the faint hiss of gunfire cut through the corridors. Yet Shadow remained calm, calculating every step, predicting every reaction, and adjusting the team's path. Kane covered the rear, neutralizing threats with deadly precision. Diaz dismantled traps, clearing the path. Park maintained communications with the carrier, guiding their extraction route. Emily's presence held the team together, a steady center in the storm of fire and confusion. At the extraction point, the enemy attempted to flank the team from the side corridor. Emily moved instantly, signaling Kane to intercept, while she redirected the remaining operators along an alternate path. Every movement was precise, measured, lethal. A brief firefight erupted, enough to distract the enemy without compromising the team. Shadow moved like a ghost, neutralizing threats silently, guiding her team through danger. Minutes stretched into eternities as they navigated the final stretch to the extraction zone. Finally, the team emerged outside the outpost, the moonlight reflecting off the waves beyond. A helicopter hovered nearby, prepared for extraction. Emily motioned them toward the landing zone. The final stretch was tense. Enemy forces were still nearby, but Shadow's strategic foresight had minimized risk. One by one, the team boarded, adrenaline high, hearts racing, yet their trust in her unwavering. She was the last to step aboard, scanning for threats, ensuring everyone was accounted for. As the helicopter lifted off, Emily allowed herself a brief moment to exhale. The mission had reached its breaking point and her team had survived intact. Every contingency she had calculated had been executed flawlessly, every instinct proven correct. Officers who had doubted her, feared her, or underestimated her had now witnessed the reality. Shadow was not just a name, she was a force. And though the mission was complete, Emily knew this was only the beginning. The storm wasn't over. The Navy's shadows still held many secrets, many dangers. The roar of the helicopter blades filled the night air, cutting through the tension like a knife. Emily Shadow Carter sat near the rear of the cabin, eyes scanning the terrain below. The darkened outpost shrank into the distance, enemy searchlights flickering in the aftermath of their swift, precise operation. The strike team remained tight, adrenaline still coursing through their veins, but each operator now carried a new understanding. Shadow was not just a name, not just a myth whispered in classified corridors. She was the living embodiment of lethal precision, calm under fire, and unshakable leadership. Sergeant Kane, still gripping his rifle, glanced at her and spoke quietly. I didn't realize what we were dealing with until now. You're unbelievable." Emily allowed herself a brief, knowing smile. She didn't need praise, the mission's success was reward enough. But these moments, where doubt dissolved into trust, were crucial. She had earned their confidence not with words, but with action, with presence, and with the unwavering competence that had carried them through the fire. The helicopter banked over the coastline, moving toward the extraction point on the carrier deck. Below, the USS Independence loomed, a beacon of order in a sea of uncertainty. Emily's mind was already cataloging the next steps: debriefs, intelligence analysis, potential threats emerging from the extracted data. Even in the rare moments of quiet, she never stopped assessing, calculating, preparing. Shadow's mind was always 3 steps ahead, a skill that had saved countless lives, and one that no one present could fully comprehend yet. Lieutenant Park, usually reserved and analytical, exhaled heavily. "You kept us alive, and we didn't even see half of what you were doing. How do you manage it?" Emily's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. "Focus, observation, anticipation, and trust your team. You followed every move, every instruction perfectly. That made my job easier." Her words were simple, but each syllable carried the weight of countless operations executed flawlessly under conditions that would have broken less disciplined operators. Corporal Diaz, still tense from the close calls inside the outpost, finally relaxed slightly. "I thought we were done for when that patrol came back. You moved like a ghost." Emily inclined her head subtly, acknowledging the compliment without breaking her composed exterior. Ghost, shadow, phantom, names didn't matter. What mattered was survival, efficiency, and the successful completion of the mission. She had become a living reminder of what precision, training, and instinct could achieve. As the helicopter touched down on the carrier, the team disembarked quickly but methodically. Crew members at the landing zone glanced curiously at Emily, aware of her presence but unaware of the legend standing among them. Shadow moved ahead of the group, ensuring the team reached safety and that no loose ends remained. Even here, after completing a high-risk operation, her attention to detail was impeccable. No one could afford complacency, not when the enemy was still at large, and not when classified intelligence rested in her hands. In the carrier's debriefing room, Admiral Thomas Hawk Reynolds awaited them. The team filed in, and the silence that followed was heavy but respectful. Shadow handed over the extracted intelligence, her movements deliberate, precise. The Admiral reviewed the data quickly, his steely gaze briefly meeting hers. "Excellent work," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of approval without need for elaboration. Shadow inclined her head subtly. Praise was unnecessary. The mission was complete, the team intact, and critical intelligence secured. That was enough. The team debriefed, recounting details of the operation under Emily's guidance. Each member spoke with newfound confidence, sharing insights while deferring to her leadership. Shadow corrected small errors in their observations, pointing out subtle threats they had overlooked, without diminishing their contributions. In these moments, she was not only a strategist and operator but also a mentor, quietly shaping the next generation of officers to survive, adapt, and act decisively under pressure. Later, in the quiet of the carrier's observation deck, Emily allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The night sky stretched endlessly above, stars reflecting faintly on the ocean's surface. She had completed another mission, preserved lives, and extracted vital intelligence, yet her mind raced ahead to what lay beyond. Rogue factions, hidden threats, and unpredictable adversaries always awaited. Shadow had survived countless operations, but the world remained dangerous, and vigilance was her constant companion. Ensign Lopez, now calmer and more composed, approached her hesitantly. "Lieutenant, Shadow, I can't thank you enough. I thought I understood leadership before, but you've shown me something different." Emily's eyes softened, but only briefly. Leadership isn't about recognition, it's about responsibility, and right now the responsibility is ensuring we remain ready for whatever comes next. Her voice was calm, measured, but carried a quiet authority that left no room for doubt. The crew moved around them, but Shadow remained still, surveying the horizon. In her mind, every variable was accounted for, every contingency mapped, every potential threat evaluated. She had led a successful mission, earned the team's trust, and reinforced her legend. Yet even in the aftermath of success, Emily Carter, the operative known only as Shadow, knew the danger never truly ended. The ocean was vast, the world unpredictable, and the Navy's secrets always required vigilance, precision, and courage. As the carrier sailed into the moonlit night, Emily finally allowed herself a subtle smile. The team was alive, the mission accomplished, and her legend intact. Shadow had emerged from the shadows, not just as a myth, but as a living, breathing force. And though tonight's storm had passed, she knew there would always be another challenge, another mission, another opportunity to prove that legends are forged not in whispers, but in action. The night was calm, but Emily's mind was already moving forward. The storm would return as it always did, and Shadow would be ready.